Hi everybody, I'm John Oughton and this is my new book. The title is Higher Teaching, a Handbook for New Post-Secondary Faculty, and it's basically a primer written in everyday language as much as possible for people who are starting out teaching either in university or college, who don't have a lot of experience teaching and want to both understand what they're doing and be good at it as soon as possible. My own background is I taught both contract and full-time in one university and several community colleges over 30 years. And during the last 10 years, I was a professor of teaching and learning at Centennial College, and I helped train new faculty. So you could say I taught teachers how to teach. So what I'm going to do in this little video, as well as promote my book, is talk about 4 secrets they don't tell you about post-secondary teaching. And I'm going to try to keep this brief and I hope interesting. So the first one, and this is something that takes a while to understand when you get into teaching, education is an ecosystem. And what I mean by that is all the choices and options and so forth within the job of teaching tend to reflect on each other. And I'll give you an example. Suppose that you're having trouble with managing a class. The students are unruly, they're not receptive to learning, they're acting up. There could be a number of reasons for that. They might not like the environment, they might not like you personally. They may just be a difficult group of students. But it's also possible that some of the choices you've made are causing them to rebel and act out, or at least inspiring them. For example, if you're very authoritarian, if you spend all your time on business, covering what's in the curriculum, you never spend a minute or two to socialize, to see how they're doing, to share a little fun activity or an icebreaker or something like that, you don't learn their names. And this is important to students. They like to feel they've got some kind of personal relationship with their teacher. You don't listen to their opinions, or you don't solicit their opinions about things that you can alter in the course. So those decisions can lead to problems with classroom management. That's one example of how things you might not think of in one respect affect the business of teaching in another. And to give you another example of this, the evaluation plan, and I'm going to talk more about evaluation in a little while because it's often problematic, can affect how the students enjoy and perceive a course. If it's a traditional plan with a bunch of tests and a big final exam that's worth a large portion of the mark, that tends to stress them out. And they will respond to that stress with anxiety, asking you for extra help, nothing wrong with that, or simply dropping out of the course if they feel it's too difficult. So depending on what you're teaching, that evaluation plan could make sense. But it's also possible if you get to teach the course a second or third time, you want to look at replacing some of those tests with other ways of evaluating them, such as a project or a portfolio or a presentation. You also might look at, if it's possible, reducing the proportion of the mark for the final exam, which tends to be a very anxiety-producing effect. So obviously I get into more in this in my book, but the point I want to make here is the decisions you make as a teacher in one realm often affect what happens in another. So that's the first point. The second one, which somewhat relates to the first point, is you've probably heard by now of Bloom's domains, or at least of the cognitive domain. Bloom's committee said there were 3 important domains of learning. Cognitive, which is facts, ideas, theories, models. Affective, which is feelings, attitudes, values. And the third one, psychomotor, which is kind of an unfortunate term these days, but what they meant was learning that involves the body, that involves use of the hands, that involves physical movement, dance, massage therapy, being a car mechanic, becoming a sculptor. All of those are psychomotor activities as well as other activities. So what's important about the affective domain? First of all, it's often ignored in higher education to a surprising extent. And what I mean by that is we tend to focus on ideas, theories, models, facts. We tend to focus a lot less on what the students feel about those, how they feel about the way it's being presented, and even in a course outline where there are obviously affective objectives or outcomes. For example, students will learn to value the opinions of others. Students will work effectively in a collaborative situation. Students will write a journal about their feelings about the material in this course. Those are all affective outcomes. But often what I found in my experience teaching and observing other teachers, people often don't teach these. Sometimes there's a belief that if you just teach the cognitive stuff, the affective will come along. And in fact, I don't think that's true. At least you don't know that the affective side of it has come along unless you have some way of finding that out from students, like a project or evaluation that focuses on that. It's like taking your car to a mechanic and the mechanic says, well, you got problems here with the cooling system and with the brakes. So I'm going to fix the cooling system, the brakes probably look after themselves. It doesn't really work, does it? So what about the affective domain in teaching? Well, first of all, find out what your students are feeling about the course and about your teaching style, not just at the end with the standard kind of wrap-up evaluation, but after a few weeks when you can still make some changes and you can still, use the information they're giving you about their feelings right there and then in the course. The second is that there are ways to teach and evaluate affective outcomes and student work. Generally, it's got an affective component. It's just that people often aren't comfortable with them or don't know about them. So when you read your course outline, if some of the outcomes or objectives are in the affective domain, and yet you don't see evaluations specifically focused on that, and you don't see anything in the week-by-week outline about how those are going to be taught, you need to do a little research and digging. And you can find very helpful things on the internet or by talking to other more experienced teachers to help you look at this. But if you ignore the affective domain in terms of what's going on in the class, it can lead to problems with classroom management later on because the students don't feel heard. They don't feel you really care about whether they are enjoying the course or whether they're feeling frustrated or angry about something. It's better to get those feelings early, either through informal conversation or through some sort of anonymous questionnaire, and then you can think about them and decide what to do. So there's another example of how choices in one domain or one part of teaching and learning affect choices in another. Okay, and finally, the dreaded word, and I've made this one fuzzy because it's so scary, evaluation. Often this is teachers' least favorite part of the job, especially if you teach the kind of course where you end up with masses of long written assignments which you have to put into a pile and make your way through grading. So what teachers generally like is the subject matter itself, the curriculum, and the teaching, the experience with students, the exchange of ideas and opinions, the ability to help them and guide them. That's all good stuff. They often are not so fond of the evaluation part, seeing it as a chore or a grind. But the interesting thing is if you talk to students about what's most important to them in a course, they'll often say it's the evaluation. And this is partly because we've conditioned students to see grades and the final mark as the ultimate arbiter of how they're doing. And there's a movement these days in higher education called ungrading to try to replace traditional graded evaluations like tests, exams, assignments, and so on with more narrative approaches. What did the student do well? Where did the student struggle? But not just focus on is it a B plus or a B minus or is it an A or whatever, which is what tends to be the case with it. And evaluation design is important because let's say you're teaching a course that's written in terms of learning outcomes and you've got 7 learning outcomes on there and the students are supposed to make some progress in each one of them during the course. You don't know if they've made progress in all of those during the course unless A, you've taught all of them in some way, and B, at least one evaluation addresses each of them. So You can have an evaluation that addresses more than one outcome, of course, but if there's, for example, an affective outcome that's not addressed in the evaluation, you can't say for sure you know if students have made progress in that or what kind of progress they've made. So that's a typical flaw I see in a lot of courses. Is it'll be there in the course outline that there's a certain outcome, but when you ask the teacher, where is this being taught? Oh, well, they get it from the textbook. Okay, but you should at least check in with them to make sure how much they've absorbed and used. And then when you look at the evaluation plan, oh, well, I didn't think that was important, or we talk about it in class. That's not evaluation, that's instruction. The final one, and for this, I don't have a cute little handmade sign, I have a lump of brick, is a theory of mine called the indigestible lump. And it goes like this. In each course, somewhere in it, there's a part that's very hard to teach. It may be highly technical, it may be very abstract, it may be something that students simply don't enjoy getting into. Example would be in an English course, punctuation or proper citation and reference style. It tends to be deadly, and often the teacher launches into a lecture about it. The students are yawning or checking their devices or, whispering to each other, and you just want the class to be over too. You know you've lost them. There are ways to take an indigestible lump of curriculum and make it digestible. First of all, you can break it up into smaller morsels. You can add some element that makes it fun, like a game, Kahoot or something like that, to review it. You can put students in groups and give each of them a chunk of it, have them chew on it for a while, and then tell the rest of you what they found. But you can't just leave it, because if you presented it the way I first described, where everyone looks bored and nobody's listening, they haven't really taken it in. They heard you, but they're not processing it. They're not doing anything with it. So there you have it. There's 4 secrets. They don't always tell you about higher education, things I figured out on my own. As for my book, Higher Teaching, you can order it through your local indie bookstore, which would be a great way to keep supporting them. You can order it from the publisher, Guernica Editions. Guernica is in the Picasso painting. Or you can order it from all the usual online retailers. It's available through Amazon, through Barnes & Noble. In Canada, it's available through Indigo. So I hope you enjoyed this little talk. Let me know in a comment if you found it useful or you disagree with something, because education is always about discussing. It's never about being 100% right about something. And thank you for listening.